Good afternoon and welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Chimezie Obi-Wawo. Coming up, Volkswagen chief executive calls for emissions tests in Europe to be reworked to close the gap between laboratory and real-world results. We will be reviewing the latest SMI data for Africa as released by the World Economic London. Plus, oil price continues its downwards trend. A Volkswagen Chief Executive Officer Matthias Möller has called for emissions tests in Europe to be reworked to close the gap between laboratory and real-world results, an issue brought to public attention by the German car manufacturer's cheating scandal. The automaker admitted in September to rigging 11 million vehicles worldwide so that could pass official tests while emitting illegal amounts of pollution on the roads. A recall of 8.5 million affected cars in Europe will begin this week. Meanwhile, the company has been given 3 months by the car maker's second biggest shareholder to provide a full account of the roots of the diesel emissions scandal. The European Central Bank President Mario Draghi has fought back against critics insisting the bank's policies will help to raise inflation. Eurozone inflation is currently 0.2%, way below the ECB's target of near 2%. But Mr. Draghi insisted that the central bank would meet its obligations. Mr. Draghi rejected criticism of the ECB's €60 billion a month stimulus program, saying that no one had discussed the risks of doing nothing. And looking at the global market, Chinese markets saw steep losses in late trade today as investors worried about oil prices and despite an injection of liquidity into the mainland market by the central bank. Well, the benchmark Shanghai Composite closed down 6.42% at 2,749.79. Hong Kong's Hang Seng shed 2.48% to 18,860.8 points in afternoon trade. Korean stocks also fell with the Kospi index closing 1.6% lower at 1,871.42 points. Chinese markets saw steep losses in late trade today as investors worried about oil prices and despite an injection of liquidity into the mainland market by the central bank. Well, for more on what's happening on the global markets, let's bring in Javier Arguedas, DWTV Channels TV correspondent at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Good afternoon, Javier. Thank you for joining us. Well, ECB's Draghi has vowed to defy critics with inflation pledge. How are investors chewing that piece of information?
Well, you know, as always, the situation for the European Central Bank is quite difficult because we keep seeing new measures, we keep seeing instruments that the bank is trying to utilize in order to make the economy work here in the Eurozone, and they are simply not yielding the desired results. Investors know that too, but of course there are two options. One is, as you just mentioned before, doing nothing about it, and the other one would be to continue stimulating the economy. Investors, of course, want to hear and see the latter happening, despite the fact that many critics say that the big risk here is that the European Central Bank is doing all of this and is set to even increase the aid to the Euro.
Well, we sincerely apologize for that poor audio output now. Well, let's just take a quick break, and when we return, we will look at the latest SMI data coming from World Economics London. Welcome back. Well, latest SMI data from the World Economics has signaled a further easing in the rate of growth of the African economy, with both sales and market growth rising at the weakest rate since July 2015. Now, the World Economics Headline Sales Managers Index for Africa fell from 59.5 in December to 58.7 in January, reaching a 10-month low. I'm being joined now by the chief economist at the World Economic London, Brian Sturgis. Thank you for joining us, Brian. Hello, Brian. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Now, in your latest SMI for Africa, you noted that business confidence weakened but remains high in January. Could you explain that? What does that mean for the African continent?
Well, effectively, because you talked about a lot of economies there, whereas the figure is an average figure. Decrease in confidence itself. But you've got to look, if you look at the country by country, in the case of Nigeria, there's still a slowdown in growth continuing. Egypt has stayed reasonably stable. Algeria coming down very rapidly. In South Africa, a slight uptick, but only a slight one. So again, country by country, it's a very, very different position. Obviously, Nigeria is still being hit by a very, very weak oil price.
Well, we sincerely apologize for that failure in audio. But let's just continue with this program. The managing director of the London-based IC Publications, Omar Ben Yedda, says there is need for Africa to maintain a high-level optimism in its road to economic recovery. Mr. Omar, who was speaking with Channel's TV business editor Bosun Omofaye at the just concluded World Economic Forum in Davos, called on African leaders to focus on their agenda for the development of the continent.
As a group, we know the importance of Nigeria, and we understand that Nigeria needs to be strong for Africa to be strong. So it's a pleasure to be here. And for us, Davos is about finding the temperature of what world leaders are thinking. So gauging that temperature. And what I can report from Davos is that from an African perspective, Africa is resilient. Everyone here has got certain concerns. So as we've seen from the start of the year, there's been a turmoil in the financial markets, and we've got a lot of bankers in Davos. So they're very concerned about what's happening there. We're talking about a Chinese slowdown. People say Chinese contraction. It's not necessarily a contraction. They're still growing at 7% a year, which for me is fantastic news, or 6.8%. That's fantastic news, because 6.8% of a very big economy is still a lot of growth. So, and I don't think Africa will be that impacted from the slowdown in China anyway. I still think that Chinese commitments to Africa will be held, and so I'm not concerned at all on the African side.
Looks like a number of global risk issues, emerging global risk issues are being discussed here, from refugee crisis to Iran, to migration issues in Germany, in Europe. Now it looks like the world is all about the human part of the economics and not just about the econometrics. What do you think?
I'm optimistic, and I do believe that that we will take advantage of everything that's happening in the world in terms of increased connectivity and increased technology. People talk about a fourth revolution or fourth industrial revolution, but every past revolution that I've read about has been positive, be it the steam engine, be it the electricity, be it the computer. So why should we worry about this one? On the contrary, I think it can do more good than harm. Unfortunately, I'm from Tunisia. We're suffering from what's happening in Libya. We've sent 6,000 people supposedly to Syria to fight for Daesh, but which is not a positive sign. It means that there's some problems in Tunisia, that the youth are not satisfied with their future, with a bleak future, or they see a bleak future. Hence why they're seeking some solace elsewhere. But yeah, we need to be positive, and we need to show that there is hope. There is a bright future, and I'm sure that we can do it.
Let's talk a little bit about 4 weeks from now, the Africa Investment Forum, which you're putting together, will be taking place at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Now, talk to us about this. This is going to be an all-African engagement.
It's an Africa-to-Africa investment forum. Really, it was driven by the Egyptians. So it's the Egyptian Agency for Partnerships and Development who wanted to host this forum, and it was the Ministry of Investment through the General Authority for Investment that decided to host Africans to have an African investment forum, because ultimately we talk about China Africa, US Africa, EU Africa. Latin America, Africa, but we never talk about Africa, and Africa needs to do more amongst themselves to drive this growth. So we're anticipating a great forum. I believe that President Buhari has accepted President El Sisi's invitation. I believe also that the President of Gabon will be there, as will others. So we're anticipating a great forum, a B2B forum, and some great debates and discussions. Here in Davos, I don't think that there's been a strong African participation. And as I said, when people have got problems back home, Africa becomes a side issue. Whilst for us, like for yourselves, Africa is a core issue, and it's where we are, it's where it's what we love, and it's where we need to deliver on our promises. Ultimately, we can't rely on others to do it for us.